Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So, how do you create culture change? How do you use executive coaching to transform senior leadership thinking, even in the most pressurized of situations? We're absolutely delighted to be joined by Dr. Martin Egan today. Dr. Martin is joining us. He has a fascinating background that combines things such as being a chemist, interesting experiences in psychosynthesis, psychotherapy, and culture change as well. He's got extensive experience working globally with leading organizations. Now, full disclosure, I've actually worked with Martin. Martin and I go back quite a way, and we actually worked together in the Middle East last year, which was an amazing experience. But it was really great to actually work alongside Martin. And Martin has the ability to actually hold a room. And that's one of the most important things about organizations, is to be able to hold a space, and in that space to create opportunities to transform even the most stuck of teams. In his past, he's worked with some really interesting leaders in their field, such as Carolyn Taylor and Richard Barrett, who I'm sure we'll find out more about as we go through the session today. So he works and leads an organization called NDC, which he founded with Matthew Burdock. And this organization combines commercial, scientific, and psychological expertise. They help organizations in many ways, such as culture change, building leadership capability, aligning an organization around a strategy, or transforming the effectiveness of teams at any level. So obviously Martin's experience is underpinned by an extensive amount of academic experience. He's a visiting master's lecturer in organizational psychiatry and psychology. He holds a doctorate in bioanalytical science. He's our first doctor of chemistry, which is amazing. We're intrigued to hear how that shaped his thinking. He has a master's in psychotherapy, and he's also a certified supervisor in psychosynthesis. And when he's not doing all this extensive globe-trotting and work, he's also a very keen horse rider and actually has a few horses as well. So Martin, so welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here, and thank you for such a lovely integrated introduction. Some bits there that I feel humbled by when you describe them.
Brilliant. Welcome. It's fab to have you with us. We'll kick off with an easy question, or maybe tell us a bit more about your role and what you do and your organization.
So as Garen has said, forming a company 10 years this year with Matthew Burdock, it's an ever-evolving role, and I find that I'm maturing into what is it that we're really about and what is our work all about. And when we boil it down, it's really about identifying and uncovering patterns of behavior in organizations and helping them to sustain and map the right patterns of behavior that are going to give them sustainable success, be able to deliver their strategies and stuff like that. My time is divided between internal managing a company that's beginning to have substantial internal culture of its own and dynamics of its own. And I really feel in our role, because we should walk the talk ourselves, or as the metaphor says, the shoemaker's children often have the poorest shoes. We really want to make sure that we walk the talk on what we're doing ourselves. And that's quite humbling for me, because the area that I'm not strong in is systems and processes and procedures and performance management and repeatability of. I'm more comfortable in the unfolding conversation and the creative ideas and the work that we do. So in our company now, as its CEO, it's my responsibility to ensure that I delegate what I'm not good at and trust it and let it happen. In fact, I remember, Garen, a moment you were pointing out to me how many hats I was wearing in a certain project when we worked together, and that's not sustainable. So hopefully, Danny, I'm able to say that I'm trying to wear the CEO and the lead partner in steering and delivering projects, but that a lot of other stuff is happening out from me.
Fabulous. And when you think about the work you do at NDC, how does that differ to the work that other organizations in the kind of same space do?
Well, what our clients tell us is that there's something that they're not able to put their finger on, that Garen alluded to in that holding of a room. There's something that they talk about feeling seen, feeling experienced, feeling understood. And many, many times we're told that we feel like you're with us, like that you're on our side. And there's something that has come actually not just from us, that has come out of a tradition. It was feedback when I worked with Fred Kaufman on the conscious business work. It was feedback that was often heard then as well, that there was something about staying so present and being real and being connected and being able to be comfortable in our own skin and with the discomfort clients will have. So that's a differentiator. And the principles of Richard Barrett's work is all about unfolding and about values and about becoming whole and growth and development. I think we foreground that in our work, but that's not to say that we're doing that in isolation. It's done in service of their endeavor and what they need to do.
And what do your clients is there a typical client that comes to you and says, I need you to help us with this, or is there a particular thing they come to you with?
The honest answer is, over the past 10 years, no, it's the whole gamut. They'll come with everything. But the more clients get to know what we can do, they tend to want to come with something they're stuck with at the whole system level, that they know that they've tried all the component parts and they've done good leadership pieces, they've done values pieces, they've done performance, they've done various kinds of training and upskilling, but still they're not getting the full benefit that they wanted to realize. So they'll come with helping the group CEO, and that's just in my head from this morning, let's say the CEO, to bring together the key players they need to have around them and to ensure that they've locked arms and are pulling together and know what they're doing and that they're all on the same. So that's the biggest request these days, to come and start at that level, getting all people on the same page, as we say.
Yeah, and I think obviously, having seen how you work firsthand, I think it's not just about the day itself, though, is there? There's so much work that goes into creating an environment where they've had lots of interventions from different organisations, and yet they're still stuck. And it's the ability to do the work beforehand, so that people feel that this work is going to benefit them, it's going to benefit the organisation. So that kind of building of relationship, and even just before you're going into the room, it's still connecting with them and making sure that they feel comfortable and confident with what's going to happen on the day, so that there's that real trust in you, isn't there?
There is. You're reminding me of something that I probably ended up doing unconsciously, Garen, and when we worked together, you highlighted some of it for me. There's a preparing of the ground to help people make the most of the time and the opportunity. So as we know, if you gather, say, for a workshop with a group of senior people, it could take an hour for them to get the day job out of their system and begin to focus and arrive, and what are we here for? Well, we found that there's a whole lead into that, and separate conversations to have to happen with different stakeholders to help prepare them to make the most of it.
What was your journey into this? You've had a really interesting career. It's sort of founded in chemistry and it's moved from there. So what was your journey?
I'll try to give a short answer, but it's a really, really long one. So the shortest answer I can give is that I started out in analytical chemistry, and the exposure there that I was a lab technician after, say, a 3-year training in analytical chemistry. But it was a lab technician in an environment where they were producing shampoos, soaps, skincare products, medicated skincare products. And I got to see the whole system, from the raw materials coming into that plant to the finished product packaging, at pharmaceutical grade going out, and the full quality assurance lab of both finished products and raw materials. So that was meant to be my role, in a lab, just working on raw materials, which is the bottom rung of the ladder when you start in science, coming in with stuff like that. But what I was really, probably in hindsight, a bit of a busybody. I learned more by being on the factory floor, really curious about what was going on with all these boxes that were coming in. Where were they coming from? Why are they in that format? Barrels of stuff. What's in the barrels? Where are they going? And then in the production area, it was all men at the time, men in overalls, just making thousands of gallons of shampoo. Those people knew more about what can go wrong with the making of this shampoo than any scientist back up in the lab. But the hierarchy of things would be, it's the lead scientist for formulation that's going to know those things. So I think, with a big interest that I had at the time in spirituality and growth and personal development and family and pastoral care, ministry, they would have called it in Catholic circles, that interest with the science and the environment I was in, a large production plant, that started something in how systems operate and how people and patterns of behavior and systems are at play. So that's really the starting point. I went on to do more in the science field, and all the while in that, I was able, in order to pay the bills when I was in London, I also worked in the sector, St. Mungo's, which is a big homeless charity in London. And I worked as a locum for 3 years, emergency winter, hostels, you name it. So I was always seeing the raw side of life, as well as the privileged side that I was fortunate to have through science and research and institutions like Kew Gardens. So I went, and after making it to management level in science roles, by the last science appointment I had, I was actually specifically recruited because it was a dysfunctional team. And I was really wondering, reading between the lines, what's this really saying about me as a scientist? They just kind of had a look at the CV, no more questions. I was recruited because this was a really, really fragmented, broken, not working team in a high throughput drug discovery environment where there was a lot at stake, and it really so I was being hired really to do what I kind of might do now, even though I was also hired for a scientific role on paper. And at that time, I had already begun training as a psychotherapist part-time. I did a 2-year training, which was condensed. It was every Monday evening and one weekend a month. And at the end of that, by 2004, I had fully left the lab and gone into the NHS. In fact, it was a dual role with children's schools and families in Merton and child adolescent mental health in the Southwest London St. George's Mental Health Trust. So again, I was getting to see what's the dynamic even between local authority and NHS. And there I was fortunate enough to get a systemic training. I got a training in family therapy, systemic foundations, and put that together with the depth work of analytical psychology and the practical work of working with head teachers, failing schools. What I was able to discover when you're thinking about education and children, especially in pupil referral units who are excluded from school, and the work is all going on to work with the so-called problem child, and you discover, hold on a moment, we've got problem teachers as well, and we've got problem schools and problem communities. I don't think about it in problem terms anymore, but that would have been the language of the day.
And because definition is really useful for people. So systemic family therapy, what is that exactly?
Systemic family therapy seeks to say that the solution of this family or this group of people lies somewhere among themselves to be uncovered. Not that there's an expert going to come in and diagnose and fix something in any one person. The problem located, let's say a school refusing child, you know, they're 14 years of age, they're school refusing, they're locked in their room, they're becoming reclusive, and they're not going to go to school. So one approach would be, well, we're going to have therapy or some form of intervention with the child. Another might do a little intervention with the parent. What a systemic approach does is tries to work with everyone in that system. And I'll give a quick example. The boy returns to school, say 3-4 months later, and the thing that unlocked it was trapped grief in the family, where the mother is actually still not resolved her loss of her mother. And the boy is there unconsciously trying to protect the mother because he's worried about her. Now, he doesn't tell you that on the first couple of coaching sessions or therapy sessions, and he never will tell you that. But you unlock that through understanding together what's going on here.
So it's quite deep work, isn't it? And not necessarily taking the presenting symptoms as the thing to work on. It's kind of having a curiosity, isn't it?
It is. So that's how I got into the work I do now. That same principle is I often say it even with the executive teams we're working with. It's the same thing. It's a family system of an executive team that's playing out its own story, not able to see itself, but when you can help it start to see itself and see the role each is able to play and the impact each is having on each other and on the wider business and everything that they touch. That's what systemic thinking is about.
And during your career, particularly at the beginning, you had some quite formative experiences with really sort of inspirational people in their fields, like Carolyn Taylor, Fred Kaufman, and Richard Barrett as well, didn't you?
I did. You know, I'm beginning to feel old because I look back in psychology as well. I was working very closely with a guy called John Rohn, who's described as the father of humanistic psychology in the UK. And I worked with him right up into his 90s, you know, had him as a supervisor and went to him and stuff. Fred Kaufman was recruiting. Fred and Carolyn Taylor were both recruiting in 2007 to build a European conscious business consulting team. And I went through, I remember being anxious and nervous as I can be on the occasion. Will I make it? It was a full series of virtual interviews followed by a whole weekend together with I think 30 people or 30 were recruited, 15 people in the day that I was on. And only, I think, out of 130, I think they went on to pick 10. And that was when I met Fred Kaufman and Carolyn Taylor. Carolyn actually was in the recruitment selection piece. Carolyn quickly saw in me the background that was able to, she was a specialist in corporate culture and diagnosing what's happening, what's really driving the culture here, what's the untold story in this system that's sustaining the culture you have. And she recognized an aptitude I had to tell the story that's written between the lines when you look at interview scripts or you look at all the information we have, what's the story that's not told here? So immediately Carolyn put me on culture projects.
And what was the sort of approach to sort of culture change then? Like when you start working on a culture project, what typically is the process that you'd follow?
Well, I'll fast forward a little bit because the recession came in early 2009, late 2008, and that full-time role with working with Fred became a part-time associate freelance, let's see how we'll cope role. And then at that time, Carolyn and Christina Nagira founded their own company, Walking the Talk. And they appointed me as head of assessments. And so we built the whole diagnostics of how can we make it more less labor intensive and more inclusive and more involved. So we invented a system to use focus groups, forensic focus groups, to understand what's really going on. And this is where the academic past came back. I drew on something from Birkbeck, actually, called interpretive phenomenological analysis. And interpretive phenomenological analysis is a fancy way of saying, how can we involve the bias and the subjectivity of the interviewer in making sense of what's going on? Because in pure science, that will be excluded. You're not allowed, and what you're experiencing has nothing got to do with the objectivity of what we're trying to find out. But in this kind of work, the subjectivity of what you're experiencing might have everything to do with what we're trying to find out, because, as they say, self is instrument in the theory about this. So we formulated that into a process where we were able to understand and analyze and really present back, which is the gold, the pure gold for the executive team, particularly the CEO, really present back a picture of showing this is how the patterns of behavior in your organization are playing out. This is what is sustaining them. We believe it's a strong working hypothesis evidenced by this, this, and this. And already we have begun a dialogue of beginning to make sense of it, because we've met enough of your people who are able to talk and understand about this. So let's continue the conversation. That would be our stance on culture work in a nutshell, I think.
Oh, culture is such an interesting subject.
I was going to say, yeah. How do you define culture? It's kind of that perennial question, isn't it? What's your personal definition?
I use a definition that Carolyn Taylor came across from a book called Switch Points, written about the Canadian railway system. And in Switch Points, there's a line where Ned Morse says that it's the patterns of behavior that are encouraged or discouraged by people and systems over time. And we've played with that definition a little by adding the word tolerated to it. When you add the word what's tolerated to it, you really have a lot more. My definition is definitely that the patterns of behavior are guiding every single decision, how people are interacting, how systems are interacting, people with systems, systems with people. That's all the territory of culture.
And just a little bit of a follow-up question as well, because again, you're the first person that has a particular specialism in culture. I think it's really good to help people get a grounding on it. And we're talking about sort of patterns of behavior. So what might be a sort of a classic pattern of behavior that you might see in an organization, either a healthy organization or a dysfunctional one?
I'll go for a healthy one first, even though my mind.
That's good. We're always drawn to the deficit in our business, aren't we?
A healthy pattern is where something that someone else is not okay with, let's say at any level of the organization, is able to be addressed openly and honestly and timely. So that would be a pattern. And an organization, even a newcomer coming into that organization, quickly starts to catch on that we don't go off and talk about our problems behind people's back or in the corridor or somewhere else. We actually, in this company, have a pattern of addressing it openly, because that's what we do, and addressing it in the moment, being able to sit around a table and say, I have a concern. I'm not sure about what we're really saying here and what we're doing, and here might be implications. The courage to address that and not sit on it for too long. Easy to do, but it takes confidence, it takes courage, it takes self-awareness, and it takes somebody in leadership who's able to be brave enough to trust that we can have that level of frankness and that level of openness respectfully. So that would be a pattern. Do you want a negative one?
Go on then.
I think a negative pattern would be where people don't realize what they're caught in. So there's a habit of coming into all of the meetings with a sort of a frantic energy, an urgency, must please the CEO, he wants this, or she wants this, they need this, we need this, playing to some agenda that they're unconsciously caught in. or maybe consciously caught in sometimes. What I think in the pattern that needs to be noticed is, when is that unconscious? When is it not a choice? And when it becomes a choice because they know they're doing it and they can see that the tide of the system forces of that organization are so compelling, like a magnetic field, that even a newcomer who wouldn't be so caught by that within weeks is actually swimming in the same flow. To bring awareness to that, that's catching out what the patterns are.
When you think about the work you do, how do you know whether the organization or the leadership team is ready to do the work?
I don't know if I fully can know, to be honest,
Yeah.
until it's too late, as sometimes happens.
It's often you about 11 o'clock on the first morning, you'll start to know.
But having said that, I'm getting, even in the last couple of years, if I have reflective practice and conversations you and I would have, Garen, as peers over the years as well, helps us continue to fine tune what are the conditions of readiness. The ultimate real readiness would be shown when they have the courage to really realize that what they might need to do is going to be uncomfortable for them sometimes, and that they will have to be prepared to look in the mirror and be prepared for things to change. They must have to change and reflect and see their part and see how they're contributing. Now, we don't always get that level of receptivity from the outset. I guess enough of rapport and enough of contracting in trust to say, we have a guideline, we know what we're doing, we know where we're taking you, but we will find things that we cannot predict for. How will we navigate them when we meet them? And what will be the thing that will keep us on track?
And I guess the challenge is always, everyone's on their own individual journey. So if you take a leadership team of 7, 8, 9 strong-minded individuals, all running very busy areas of their own organization, some may have a stake in how it is at the moment because it allows them to do what they need to do. So I guess the challenge is, like, who is to define that it's ready and this is the right thing to do?
That's a huge challenge. Only today I heard from someone that person X wasn't really keen on us doing this work. Person Y, who used to not be keen, now thinks we need to do it straight away. and where it depends on what's on their agenda and what they're experiencing. Yeah.
So you work a lot with senior leadership teams. What particular challenges does that bring?
I should think carefully before I answer that question. The first thing that was on the tip of my tongue was egos. I think the challenge that I realized maybe 6 or 7 years ago was that when they're already at the top, if they're already very, very senior, their openness and willingness to develop and grow and get to the next level has plateaued. And because it has plateaued, there's a kind of a sense of being a bit of a know-it-all that can come in, and breaking the mold of being a know-it-all is the biggest challenge I find. And even when people are more open and humble to present as not being kind of arrogant or coming across as fixed or expert or stuck in what they're talking about or what their position is on something, it's still there. And they've been promoted and rewarded by having that there. So to get humility and openness and a willing to experiment and stay with not knowing, that's the hugest challenge.
Yeah, and the ego plays a role, doesn't it? What did I hear? Is it Rodney Evans from the Ready said the ego is the bouncer that stops people coming in and going into the identity. It's like, because it is because it does play a role, and to be honest, like an ego at that level, because there's so much critique, you're so visible, aren't you? You can't do right for doing wrong, and the ego is there is sort of a protective measure as much as anything, isn't it? So how can you work with that?
And that's been the biggest barrier. I was going to expand, Danny, as well on your question, to think that, you know, what's happening when it's not got enough of conditions to make that work? What's the minimum viable conditions to make it work? And where it gets really stuck is where the ego is threatened and they don't realize that it's threatened. And then I have to skillfully navigate that, which sometimes involves saying, you know, I don't think we're able to help you right now at this time. You'd like somebody who can come in and give you the answer, and it must be the answer you wanted. So there are people who will give you that, and it's not us.
And that's quite courageous to do that, isn't it, with the client, to say?
Sometimes I need a glass of wine. I need a glass of wine before that conversation. We have had those conversations, though, and everybody has benefited by having them.
I was going to say, it does a thing, doesn't it? Even just having that conversation, provokes something and
It
makes,
does. It brings
yeah.
peace at the end, because one of the things I've been prone to is working too hard for a client. And I hope that in my next phase of my career, I'll have the wisdom to identify and recognize that earlier, because there's no point. I know this well from working as a therapist or working as a coach. It's the client that has to do the work, not the practitioner. But it's easy to want to help. Or at least I have that disposition, and many of the people that are drawn to this work have the same disposition as well.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing as well with senior leaders, particularly the ones that are very sort of high in dominance, is that they often listen in hindsight. So they kind of walk away afterwards, and aesthetically, the interaction that you've just had doesn't look pretty, but it's what they do afterwards that really matters, isn't it?
And this is where the follow-up, the intuition to know when is the right time to follow up with a gentle touch or a just following on. That's the art of supporting. And it's why when I think of some senior leaders who are uncomfortable accepting coaching, which if you look at the psychology of that in Hogan psychometrics, for example, high adjustment tends to be feedback resistant at some level, and in the worst cases uncoachable. So what I found for in terms of working with people who find that more difficult, calling that a reflective conversation, calling that a chat, even though it's a very meaningful chat, it's a very reflective chat about them, about their work, but it's in service and support of them. So ultimately, I have to remind myself when I'm frustrated in those scenarios that compassion is probably going to be the best solution for myself and for them in that work.
And I'm going to ask a question. I'm not quite sure where this question's going, but it's just that for people that are watching this, a lot of it is about, we've used the word transformation, it's kind of lost its meaning. But when you're with a room and you've done the groundwork and people are incredibly stuck, and you've designed a carefully curated day, and they're just coming, they're getting to the point where you just need to push a little bit more. How do you know? Like, it's a really difficult thing because it's a very tacit knowledge kind of thing, but there's a sense, isn't there? Because there's always that kind of thing, do no harm.
Yeah.
But you've got to create enough tension to create change, haven't you? How do you know when it's time to push that little bit further?
I love that question. And this is where years of practicing as a therapist has helped me, I think. I'm asking myself, where is the will available? So where is the collective will? Even if it's, I remember doing this once courageously in a room with 40 people in two big divisions of a multinational telecoms organization. And it was like trade union negotiations. It was a pretty tough, stuck situation. And I had a super colleague with me. But when you're working with a great colleague in those moments as well, either one of us don't really know what to do either in the moment, but we have to have enough of trust and faith in each other to think that whatever either of us do is going to be good enough or the right thing for now. And I remember walking into this wall of very, very senior global kind of two divisions, pretty fixed. We'd already done, 4 hours, and it's pretty, all the right things are being said, but there's nothing moving. And sometimes I use my mood. I kind of can get very assertive, very cross, show my frustration, show my emotion. So a mix of getting the right balance of that, and then asking with clear openness, where is the will trapped here? And then shut up. And that unlocked the whole room.
So there's something around allowing silence to do this sort of heavy lifting.
Allowing the silence to do that. And I remember the moment that comes after that question. You never know what it'll be. It'll usually be something very depressed and unspoken that wasn't able to come out before. That's blocking. The elephant in the room is the kind of easy language. But I'm talking here about something more than an elephant in the room. Sometimes nobody in that room knows. Everybody in that room may have really wished with all the will in the world for this to be better and for it to move in the right direction, but it was stuck. So I'm guided by picking up on the, well, sorry to use technical language, what would be called strong countertransference in my own body. Am I feeling tight? Am I feeling stiff? Am I feeling fear? Am I anxious? What's going on? And two questions: is it mine, or is it from them, from the system? More often than not, in those cases, it's not mine, at least mostly not. I have my own too. And using that information, that's like inner information, to guide a question, to give a clue about the tone that's needed in the question, the energy that's needed in the question, or where it might go. So that's the best I can offer in terms of unpacking the great question, what do you do and how do you know what to do?
Yeah, but I think it's a really important question to ask, isn't it? And I guess sort of that's preceded by really doing, because the thing is like doing the work on yourself in advance, isn't it? Like really knowing yourself and how you might respond to situations like that, and understanding what's at stake for you, because that can have an influence, can't it, in terms of how you feel. And then that allows you in the moment to think about the counter transference, isn't it? But it happens so quickly, doesn't it? So you almost need like muscle memory, don't you, to go, okay, this is the thing. And it feels like a feeling then, doesn't it?
So the muscle memory is key, in my view, for having our own center. That in no matter how tense or how much into crisis that work can go, both in a longer term project that can be kind of sustained crisis in a project, or in a workshop scenario, or even a coaching scenario that can be a crisis stuckness as well. Where is my composure coming from? How do I recenter? And that's what in the executive coaching work we do a lot, is try to help people find their own core, find their own center, that their place to come back to. And a lot of the work that's done on mindfulness, I think, has the capacity to go there, to cultivate that, but I don't think it takes that next step. It does the mindfulness work, but it doesn't go the next step of saying you're practicing being mindful in order to have access to composure and objectivity when you need it. That's the step.
So you work a lot internationally. So you talked earlier about you and Garen had worked in the Middle East. How much do you have to adapt your approach in different international contexts?
Hugely, hugely. We wrote a blog recently, myself and John, our colleague John Crossan, about our trip to Georgia, and my first time going there. And we're still working there. And I think we will go on a journey of learning about the psyche of the local group and the particular organization dynamics as well. But at the local level, we were thrown by an assertiveness and a politeness and a welcoming that they were incongruent for us, coming from England or from this part of the world, and trying to learn and navigate. So therefore I had to learn to up the assertiveness with respect, and hold the assertiveness much more strongly and firmly than I would have to hold it in Europe, for example. The Middle East is a whole other story, where I believe that my Irishness and understanding the kind of gregariousness of the Irish psyche has been an advantage in getting into the gregariousness of other cultures sometimes. When to be playful and frivolous, when to stay chatting at small talk level for long enough, and I'd be fired in some organizations. I did as much or as frivolous, and how to use humor and stay with it and trust it, and realize that this invitation for really silly humor sometimes and banter that's maybe questionable is essential to them coming to ease, and it's a signal from them that you're included and you're trusted. So I don't think that's in a textbook anywhere. It's stuff I've picked up from working. I could go on country by country and come up with all my biases. I know even across the various countries in Europe, there are huge stretches of style needed in my interactions with Dutch in particular. I have to not take personally what I might take an affront to. 20 years ago, I would have taken an affront to some of the stuff that I now flow with quite easily.
And just building on that as well. So again, so in the room, you're identifying a pattern of behavior that everyone has agreed is not what we want to do, not what we want to have. And, often cultures, it's about face. It's like, extending face to someone so that they can maintain respect in front of their people. How can you respectfully challenge that behavior? Like what are the sort of the different things at your disposal to potentially call that behavior? Because if you allow that behavior to exist in this room, then it's a challenge then, isn't it, for the integrity of the program?
I think psychoeducation is a starting point, respectfully assuming positive intent, and then having methods of uncovering that the fact that intention and impact are, of course, not always aligned, unpacking that and making people aware that how become aware of what's really happening for them, which many people who have never been trained to have to go there at all, but to have permission to do that without being intrusive, and at the same time hold enough of awareness to be bothered or care about how it has landed with the other person or the impact on the business? Are you getting what you want really? One of the things that I think helps the most is doing what Barry Oshry calls a time out of time, to really get up on the balcony and say what's really happening here. You all want the same thing actually, but you're going about it in so many different ways. What will be a smart way of optimizing this together? So language that's used is key. When I use the word optimizing there, I've gone for a performance, scientific, rational language. In another setting, that language would be the wrong language. The language of creativity or growth or learning or development would have been the right language. So I think the art of this work is to match mindset, worldview, and language as much as possible appropriately and appeal to the next evolution of what that might be able to become.
So just shifting gears slightly, when you look at everything you get to do, what do you enjoy most? What do you get excited about doing?
My favorite is getting an intact group, an intact team. So they are hopefully no more than 10 people, say 6 to 10 people, in staying in a conversation long enough to have a breakthrough about what it is that they're prepared to lock arms together. And I mean, really energetically and emotionally lock arms and stand shoulder to shoulder together on executing that. And I don't mean just executing a kind of a tangible ambition, though that can sometimes be the thing. I'm also meaning the how are we going to, and how are we going to stay on track and stay honest and stay in it. That's what I love doing, because it's an art and a science. It's not something I ever do alone anymore. I may have done that alone up to 5 years ago, but for the past 5 years, I will not do it to myself, to leave myself alone in that setting. That's why we work together, Garen. I reached out to a peer I respected that could stand shoulder to shoulder with me to do that kind of work. That's my favorite.
And you talked about getting people to stay with it long enough to get that breakthrough, and that can be a real challenge, can't it, when we're working with groups of leaders kind of wanting to short circuit and go and come and do it in an hour and do the thing in
That's always the request. And in the current environment, I have a higher number of clients than ever before who now want less with more, and urgency and time, and not able to give permission or space for something to take its course. I think that must be just coming from the general climate globally at the moment, because I often would have some who had that tendency, but others who wouldn't. And now I'm noticing that's becoming a little bit more contagious. So we try to contract for expectation management that, this offsite 2-day or 1 day is not going to be the magic bullet. Can we make sure we have at least a follow-up half day in a month from now, so that you can the work in between? In fact, in the psychotherapy world, there's a lot of research done and a lot of reflection and a lot of literature on the space between, and they're meaning the space between each session. Because is the work actually happening in the coaching sessions themselves, or is the work happening in the space between the coaching sessions themselves? And I think it's both. And my preference is to get a good provoke enough happening in the space between the sessions, or workshops or meetings or coachings. How often, though, however, very frequently, it's only happening in the session, and then they go off to the firefight the rest of their lives.
Yeah, because I guess the big moment is, isn't it? You have the breakthrough moment in the room, and again, sort of describing that after the breakthrough is always a really incredible moment, isn't it? When the team have the breakthrough, and sometimes someone who's unexpected says an unexpected thing, and then the air changes, doesn't it?
Yes.
And well, please, you tell us.
It's the air that changes. Now, I used to live for those moments. I've become a little bit more cynical about them in recent years, in that I'm even questioning my work to say, is it worth even getting to that moment if we don't have the ground prepared enough for what they're going to do with that afterwards? So if the conditions aren't right for the breakthrough to be able to follow through, I would prefer to slow down and not push to the breakthrough. And this is very recent, this is in the last 18 months that's moved into my thinking. However, what I'd love to be able to unlock is, when you've had a breakthrough, how do you ensure you put a continuity path to keep the momentum of it, to keep the spirit of it, and to keep the activity from it alive? I have a lovely example at the moment where, and it's work you're familiar with, Garen, I think, where what has been sticky has been an unlocking of relationships. So the interpersonal relationships of all the people involved has been sticky. That has sustained. Before, let's say, there was fragmentation. Now there's real strong individual relationships, and that's all working. But the piece that isn't is when they're all together. So that's the next stage. And that's why this work takes 2 years, 3 years sometimes, because there's growth and evolution all the time. And hopefully positive business impact and risk mitigate and de-risk the negative business impact. And sadly, can't always, sometimes it takes a bit of negative business impact to get the appetite up for the next stage or the next push.
And if you look back over your career so far, what would you say some of the biggest lessons you've learned are that you'd like to share?
I think we might have touched on one earlier in this conversation, where how critical it is to gauge the readiness of the sponsor and to understand the work that we will be asking of them and how they may need to change and stay the course to really get the benefit we're asking for. My learning is to get sharper and clearer about articulating that from the outset. That's been a big learning. The other learning I alluded to as well when we spoke was, I won't do this work on my own anymore. This work takes a very big toll, at least in my experience, psychically. I've learned to ensure that I have a mentor supervisor for my role of running a company, and a psychological supervisor for my sanity, and pay close attention to that. I've started to need to pay, and maybe age is playing a factor here as well, I needed to pay greater attention to nutrition, to sleep, to family life balance. Garen mentioned the horses, which play a huge role. And I've been finding great excitement from joining up some of those a little bit, not to take horses to work, but I trained 2 years ago in organizational equine assisted learning, and was blown away by how horses can actually play a role in an organizational constellation and tell us a hell of a lot. So these are things that sustain me, and my learning has been that I've got to have a balance of being able to sustain myself in these ways. And the peer connections I have, I've been very lonely in this work at times. I've mentioned great people like Carolyn and Fred and Richard Barrett and Barry Oshry and other great people that I've been fortunate enough to work closely with. I don't have access to every day, but I need a peer group around me who are the next generation of people carrying on this work. And I'm proud to be in this conversation, which I regard as one of those peer groups.
Brilliant. And then how do you invest in your own learning and development? What does that look like for you at the moment?
So I really miss the lack of reading time that I have these days. So I get to listen to a podcast probably twice a month. So that's one of the outlets. I make sure that I go and have conversations outside of work that are more dream conversations in the field. And that can include anything that's happening in the field of psychology and learning and development and psychotherapy, and bring that into my own thinking. Our main learning is then happening through application. The way we would do an after action review, and really sometimes we take a half a day in after action review after a bigger project, but after each workshop we're taking an hour of proper after action review. This is the biggest impact on learning, I think.
Yeah, I think I remember being involved in a retrospective after the work that we did as well. And it's actually, it's a good way, isn't it? Of absolutely taking the lessons learned, because obviously there's lessons to be learned from everything, but it's also kind of a way of detaching from the work itself, isn't it? And then moving on to the next chapter.
It is. And the trick then I've discovered, because we've been doing this for a while, is how do we ensure that those learnings that we did capture in these retrospectives are really carried forward, and not just like, oh yeah, I remember learning that before, let's do it again.
Everyone should be doing retrospectives.
Yes.
They're just the most powerful kind of meeting. And then last question, and this is because we want this podcast to really inspire the next generation of organization development practitioners. So whether they're internal or external, whether they're doing a hybrid role, whether they're just beginning in their career, or even just exploring, they're working in a chemistry lab somewhere near Kew Gardens and they're thinking about this organization development thing. What advice would you give to someone who's just considering or starting out?
Start with as much as you can to develop your own identity and your own sense of self, and really getting to understand yourself, and then begin to build onto that understanding. How are you in other contexts? What are you like in a hierarchical relationship? What are you like in a team relationship? Become aware of the role you play which, to get really psychological about this, becoming interested in the role you played in your family of origin, and how is that role you played in your family of origin beginning to play itself out in the role you now play yourself in at work? Are you the one who placates and helps and keeps everybody happy, or are you the one who is happy to cause trouble or be the rebel or whatever it might be that you find yourself in roles on? That's 2 stages, I guess, of beginning to grow awareness and development. The third stage, and this becomes a lifelong job, is noticing then, where do you find yourself in the wider system? What roles are you playing there, and what roles are others playing there? And we've spoken during this dialogue about the system forces that can sway you and take you, to really discover when is that happening you, and how are you caught in it, and what do you need to do to become detached and step back again. I mean, that's master practitioner level stuff, but if someone early on is aware of that those phenomena exist and can start to become curious about them, identify them, and then do anything that it'll take to develop learning. Even I remember joining Toastmasters years ago. That was a super thing. I remember having a voice coach, which I thought, gosh, that's ridiculous. Why would I have that? That was pre-joining Fred and Carolyn, and I think maybe it might have helped get the job. So do whatever it takes to self-develop, but not in isolation, in the context of everything else around us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for your time, Martin. I don't know about you, Danny, but I'm feeling very grounded now to go and do
Absolutely.
do some work. There's so many takeaways. Danny and I are always limited to 3 each, so I've got 5, but I'm going to go for 3 here. I guess so. Some of the takeaways I'm taking away is just that kind of building to the breakthrough moment. Like, if that is the right thing that the team needs at the time, like, what do you do? How do you notice when it's happening? Understanding things like counter transference, and how you are to know when to push as well. So that was really something I'm really taking away. The importance of sort of looking after yourself in multiple ways, because it does take a toll. This is tiring work. It's absolutely utterly absorbing, isn't it? Like, in that moment there is nothing on earth that would distract you from where you are, but bear in mind that it does, so you have to have a really good team around you, don't you? And I think that's really nice that, like, it's commercial support, pastoral support, and professional support as well. And then, just to sort of pick up, I can't quite word it, but you talked about culture earlier, which is the story between, always just trying to understand in culture what's going on there as well. So that's something that really resonates to me. Danny, how about you?
There could be loads of things, but just 3. I think one's around the importance of preparing the ground to make the most of the work we do with clients. So just making sure the ground is really set to do the good work that we need to do. I love what you said about supporting senior leaders being an art. So I think a lot of what we do is not a science, it's an art, isn't it? And really being able to flex and kind of respond and just work out what's needed in the moment. And then lastly, I would say there's something about curiosity. I think I was struck, even when you were talking about your very early career, the fact that you were so curious about kind of what's going on outside the kind of narrow role that you had, and looking at how the rest of the organization was working, and kind of hanging on to that curiosity, I guess, through all the work that we do.
Being nosy.
Being nosy, yeah.
is a good term. Nosiness is good. Brilliant.
Oh.
Well, thank you so much, Martin. If anyone's watching this, either they're a frustrated HR person looking at their team going, oh my God, what am I going to do with my team? Or if someone wants to follow your work, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
I would say go to our website, which is ndculture.com, and keep an eye on LinkedIn as well on some of the blog series that come out. There was a recent one on executive facilitation that described more of the art, perhaps, of what you might benefit from having real executive facilitation at that level. And reach out to any of us. I should say, give thanks to the team here at NDC. I wouldn't be sitting here today being able to have this conversation if it wasn't for the great team around me.
Brilliant. So people are welcome to reach out to you on LinkedIn if they've like to have a conversation with you.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Well, Martin, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. I hope people watching this have actually found like loads of value. We've kind of sort of started to demystify what happens in those kind of breakthrough moments in the room as well. Martin goes into the collection with the rest of the brilliant portfolio of guests that we've got that have brilliant perspectives and are sharing their experience as well. So if you found this really useful, we're regularly posting these videos at the moment, and we're posting them generally providing the companies that we're working with give us permission. They're going out on Mondays. Google, we're working our way through them. And it's also going out on audio every Friday as well. So just subscribe to either Buzzsprout and you'll be notified, or to the YouTube channel as well. And you'll be notified whenever the next video comes out as well. So thank you so much for watching. Thank you again, Martin, for your time and showing and being so generous with your expertise and your insights as well. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And I have to say that what you're doing is a huge contribution to the profession. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you. That means a lot.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thank you.